11 years ago, we were blessed with a smartwatch that on the surface changed the game, but below it had a really tough time making any major progress in the very early days of Android Wear. Compare that back to back with the incredible WearOS options that we have on the market right now, and it's clear to see where we started. But what's more obvious is the leap in quality in the last decade of development, and this is the Moto 360 more than 10 years on, and what we did to overcome its questionable qualities. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas, and do you remember what Android Wear used to look like? The very first watch to ship with it was LG's Gwatch, and perhaps the most obvious thing about it is that unlike the Moto 360, it was square. Yeah, many smartwatches of the time were square until the universal switch to a round display that came further down the line. What this square form factor meant was that Android Wear, the OS that ran on it, was clearly designed for a square screen, just like the full-sized OSs that we would have in our phones and our computers. Circular displays were not normal back then, and we were still trying to sort of figure out how to make the UI work on something that didn't have corners. Because when the Moto 360 rolled around, Android Wear was still in its infancy, dropping just a few months down the line. And it really wasn't the perfect match of hardware and software. By the way guys, really trying to hit 500,000 subscribers, so if you wouldn't mind hitting that button, it would mean a lot to us. Cheers. Even on first impression, the general public and critics were not fond of the ugly, albeit necessary, flat tyre section, with the black bar at the bottom interrupting an otherwise gorgeous design. This was a sore point for many people, but since it housed the display electronics and the ambient light sensor, since the rest of the display reached right up into the corners, maybe not corners, more so edge, there was a need for that flat tyre bottom part. But this was already a deal breaker for many people, and so many didn't buy this watch purely because of that particular design issue. And later on in the year, LG would go on to release the Gwatch R, which looked radically different to the original Gwatch, this time because it's round, with certainly a more conventional traditional watch shape and design to go with. This one was completely circular, allowing for an uninterrupted display, which was important, even if the bezels were quite a bit thicker than what you would find on the Moto 360 of the time. And in my opinion, it didn't look as good as the Moto 360, certainly not as futuristic, but it didn't have that interruption at the bottom of the display, and that was enough for some people to pick it over the Motorola. The IPS display used on the 360 really helped with brightness, since OLEDs of the time weren't able to reach the insane peak levels that we are very much used to today. This was a generally appreciated decision, which seems odd to say in 2025. What wasn't so appreciated were the apps that ran on the thing. They almost felt cut off due to the OS being designed for the aforementioned square panels, but being displayed on something without any corners. Critics and enthusiasts were very quick to point out that apps either didn't look great in their design, or they straight up had elements cut off by the fact that there were no corners to the display, which was critical to user experience. But perhaps the worst offence the Moto 360 committed was that its battery life was simply not good enough. Some were able to get the watch to the day's end with some juice left in the tank, but many weren't able to do that and found that their watch wasn't even managing a full day on a charge. Modern smartwatches tend to last 24 hours at a minimum, but this day-long benchmark not being cleared early on wasn't even the biggest issue. This was early in smartwatch history, remember, and as a result, people who were traditional watch wearers moving over to a smartwatch for the first time, again, smartwatches weren't normal at the time, having to charge your timepiece at least once a day was jarring. It was a culture shock. And as a result, the original Moto 360 was met with mixed reviews, some praising its design, others hating the flat tyre, with battery life concerned and software woes present in pretty much every single piece written and made. The original model was far from the only one made though. There were a few follow-ups to this, namely a sport model with an integrated rubber strap that was based on the Moto 360 first gen. A second generation that came in two different sizes and generally improved on pretty much every single area of the original, particularly in the hardware. And then curiously, there was even a rebooted model in 2020. This was called the Moto 360, but actually it wasn't made by Motorola whatsoever. Instead, a Lenovo partner called eBuyNow that had taken up the licensing deal to allow Moto 360s to be sold and made by another company. It's really strange. Same branding on the box, same branding on the hardware itself, yet Motorola was nowhere in sight. Though it was a pretty good product, all things considered, it still wasn't great in the battery life department, which seems kind of crazy. No sleep tracking whatsoever, and the design didn't hit the same way the original one did, mostly due to that massive, fat, thick bezel that was on the new model, which was sort of the complete opposite of what we were used to in the first and second generations. It also didn't seem to match the price tag, €299 or about $350. Ouch. For reference, that's the price you'll pay for an entry-level version of the current generation Google Pixel Watch 3. And what you get for your money these days versus back then is an order of magnitude better value. Battery life is no longer a weight on your shoulders, or maybe I should say wrists, because these things just last all day without a problem. The display is now seamlessly molded into the chassis, which might not look traditionally classy like the original did, but certainly feels nicer to use with your finger and the gestures on the screen. And the software has come on leaps and bounds with far more cohesive design that actually makes sense for use with a round display. The Pebble-like hardware really helped and improved Gesture's natural feeling as well. And the fitness and health tracking, well, the ones on these smartwatches are far, far better. Order of magnitudes better than what we had on the original Moto 360. And there's far better integration between the first-party tracking software and the third-party, complete summary and sharing platforms that we have today, like Strava, for example. I have absolutely no qualms recommending a Pixel Watch 3 to basically anyone today, and yet there were maybe 2 people I could recommend the Moto 360 to when that came out, and both of them were my very techie best mates. Smartwatches, and Google's own in particular, have come an awfully long way in the last 11 years, not only in the hardware, but crucially the software. I think if Motorola relaunched the 360 now, in the original form factor, but with all the beautiful tech we have today, an edge-to-edge AMOLED, the much improved performance and battery life is definitely a given, and the near athlete level fitness tracking that we now enjoy on even the most casual of smartwatches, they would sell pretty well. Maybe that's just the enthusiast in me talking and missing the golden era of smartphones and smartwatches, but those are my feelings nonetheless. The Moto 360 10 years on feels like something that was way ahead of its time. Its round design certainly turned heads, and its gorgeous chamfer and edge-to-edge panel made for a wonderful piece of hardware. But to call its negatives limitations almost feels like it's underselling what were deal-breaking problems. Modern Android smartwatches and wearaOS itself has improved so much in the last 10 plus years that we now have what resembles the Moto 360 but feels leagues ahead of those early Android timepieces. Did you have a Moto 360 back in the day? And what did you make of its hardware? And also the early versions of wearaOS, I guess, Android Wear. And have you gone from one of those to a modern Pixel Watch or a Galaxy Watch? The difference is absolutely crazy when you put them side by side. And if you have switched to a different wearaOS based watch, which one did you pick and why? Because Samsung's and Google's are very popular, but there are certainly other brands that do great wearaOS watches too. Anyway, whilst you're down there in the comments, let me know what's going on. Be sure to hit like if you enjoyed today's content and subscribe to never miss another upload. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Ryan Thomas, and I will catch you later. Cheers.